Woodcraft, offering an array of power tools, hand tools, accessories, and finishes for a variety of woodworking projects. Choose from a selection of domestic and exotic hardwoods. Learn from our demos and woodworking classes. Plus, you'll find knowledgeable customer service to inform and assist with all your woodworking questions. If it has to do with woodworking, you'll find it at Woodcraft. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Tight Bond Wood Glues, the pro's advantage.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of I Can Do That. I'm your host, Chad Stanton, and today's project is this hope chest. Now, we've built chests in the past on this show, but this one's a little bit different. Let me show you. We're going to be doing some joinery, and we're going to maximize the use of our router table. Here we're going to have some tongue and groove. We have a rabbet joint that's going to join the two legs together. We're also going to be putting rabbet joints on the panels. Now, you're probably thinking that, that seems a little complicated for me. Can't I just build the box with pocket screws? Sure, absolutely. But in this case, I preferred not to use the pocket screws. Reason being is, pocket screws I'll use when I don't have to see the holes, like maybe on the back side or the underside of a project. In this case, every time I open the chest, well, I'd be looking at those holes. And even with the plugs, well, I still don't like the look of it. And I thought, why not use this opportunity to make some traditional joinery? Besides how it's put together, we're also going to have some features such as the arch on the bottom and this curve on the lid. Now, the material that this is made out of, this particular one is made out of cherry and solid maple panels, and honestly this can get a little pricey. So for our second one, we're going to build it out of poplar and plywood. The plywood is going to be more stable than the solid wood, and it will be a nice feature if I just wanted to paint the whole thing instead of staining it. And speaking of painting, you can personalize your chest in any way you want. So let's get this aside, bring some material in here, and let's start building our hope chest. So I've been busy cutting some of the pieces for the chest. Now the stiles on the front and side, they're all going to be the same length, and it's important that they all come out exactly the same, as well as the rails going across. There's a lot of pieces to this. So to make sure that I do that, I'm going to be using the miter saw. Now, I have set up here on my miter saw a sacrificial fence. You'll notice that I screwed this on from the back. Some saws have a fence that allow you to adjust out, but this one didn't, so I made my own. What this allows me to do is I can put a stop block here for the exact length that I need for the particular part that I'm cutting. In this case, I'm doing the stiles. Now, when you get your material from the big box stores, pay attention to the ends. Sometimes from the factory, they're not going to be straight and square. So make sure that's part of the waste that you cut off. I place this in there and I'll make the cut. Now it's important that you let the blade stop all the way spinning before you lift it up, because the workpiece is now pinched between the block and the blade, and you could get a little bit of a kickback. All right, so now you can see that my pieces are all exactly the same. There's another nice feature to having this fence on there. Let's say that I just want to cut this material off of this piece. Normally what I have to do is I bring the saw blade down and line the mark up with it. But by having this sacrificial board back here, this kerf is the exact same thickness of the blade. So all I have to do is line this up, the pencil mark with the edge, and I can make the cut. perfect every time. Okay, I've got a lot more pieces to cut to get ready to do some assembly, and then we'll bring in our router table and we're going to do some joinery. So there's a lot of parts to this hope chest, but I have 3 on the bench here that will show us everything we need to do. I have a front style and a side style and a side rail. Now, the styles will each get grooves in them, and then later you'll note that this is not as wide as the front one, and that's because this is going to get rabbited out for that to sit into. The rail also will get a groove to it. So it's not a bad idea to put some reference marks on your pieces so you don't get them confused. I have set up in the router table a router groove bit. And what this will do is it's 3/8 from the edge of the bit to the bearing, so it'll be 3/8 deep, and the cutting edge itself is 1/4 inch in width. And I've pretty much set this up so it's gonna hit the middle of the board. So to make sure that this groove is exactly in the middle, I'll go through it once, then I'll turn the board over and go through it again. Yes, it might be slightly larger than 1/4 inch after that, but that's okay because the other parts are gonna fit into it. We're gonna custom those as well. So let me make that groove. All right, let me do the same grooves to the other pieces, and then I'm going to reset this router table up with the same bit, but then we're going to make tenons right on the edge of this. So I'll get back to you. I have the same bit, but I just changed the height of it. What I'm shooting for is I want that bit to shave off the wood right up to where I made that groove. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Now, because I'm going across the grain with this, I had to double check to make sure that my fence is perfectly square. The reason being, I have my sled back onto the router table. And if this fence is off, well, as I push the sled through, it's going to bind and pinch. Also on the sled, I have this sacrificial board that will help eliminate some tear out from the wood. Now I went ahead and did a couple of test cuts, and what I'm shooting for is just a slightly snug fit. I don't want to have to force it in, and I really don't want it falling out. So now I'm going to make the cut on the actual workpiece, and we'll see how it comes out. And it's just a little too tight, so I have to take a little more off. Here's a good example of what can go wrong even though you've done all your practice cuts. If this piece of wood is just slightly wider than this one from the factory, well, it's going to give me this problem. So it's not a bad idea if you can cut your material all out of one single piece of wood. Then I'm assured it's all the same size. Okay, I'm going to try and sneak up on this and get a good fit. And keep in mind, you don't want to advance the router too much. Turning it a 1/64 of an inch is actually going to wind up being a 32nd because I have to make that cut on both sides. Hey, success. Okay, I'm going to do this same procedure to the other rails, and then I'm going to reset it up with a different bit to make a rabbet cut on the front stile. So I have the front stile, and what I want to do is I want to make a rabbet cut and remove this material. What that's going to allow me to do is to put the side stile into that. So I'm doing that with a different bit. In this case, I have a 1/2" straight cut bit. Now, even though this is 1/2", I can't take that much off in one pass for two reasons. One, the router is small and it probably won't handle that too well. The second thing is, for safety, I don't want to be pushing it through. So I'm just got it set for halfway, which will remove 1/4 at a time. So I'll send it through, readjust the fence back, and keep working it down until I sneak up on my line. Pretty good fit there. Okay, I'll do the same to the other stiles, and then I'm going to set this up again to do the rabbeting for the panels that will be going in it. So I have the 1/2" plywood that's going to be the panels for our chest, and I have a little sample piece here. So I lowered the bit down. It's still that same 1/2" straight bit, but I lowered it down to the height that I wanted. And again, just like I mentioned before, I only want to take a 1/4" pass at a time on this. So I did that here, and you can see that I still have to go a little bit more to get my 3/8 depth. So I set it back, and then made another pass, and I have a really good fit. Now, you could use a handheld router with a rabbeting bit and a bearing and do that 3/8 all at one pass. But if you don't have that, this is a nice alternative. Now, another thing to talk about is the actual panel. On the original there, I used solid wood, and for that, I have to compensate for the wood movement. So I would want to make sure I leave a little gap not only in the groove, but a gap as well on the rabbet. But in this case, I'm using plywood. It's going to be more stable. I'm not too concerned about that. All right, so let me get the actual pieces in here for the panel, make the rabbet cut all the way around on it, and then I can do some assembly. I have the pieces here for one of the sides, and I'm going to glue it up. Now I'm going to want to make sure that I brush glue on both sides of this tenon, as well as into the groove itself. So how much glue are we putting in here? Well, you want enough that it's going to stay together, but you don't want so much that it's going to squeeze out. Now there's no need to put any glue inside the groove because that panel is just going to float in there. So you'll notice that I have some tape here on these clamps, and the reason for that is sometimes when the glue makes contact with steel, well, it can actually stain the wood. So the tape helps prevent that. Now before I get too crazy with clamping down on it, I want to make sure that it's still square. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to evenly tighten this up. I'll set this aside to dry, and I'll do the other three. After that, I'm going to come back and cut the arch on the sides as well as the front like we have here on the finished piece. So I'll do that and get back with you. So my panel is probably dry, and I'm going to get it out of the clamps. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to put my arch on this, and you'll notice that right now that this bottom rail is wider than the top rail. We did that on purpose. So the first thing I want to do is I wanted to measure in 1 inch on both sides. This is going to give me like a little foot for the bottom of this. Now my pattern, well, you can get this in the plans at the end of the video, and I made a template here. And there'll be a pattern for both the sides as well as a larger one for the curve on the front. And I'm going to trace this on there. Now this measurement right here, well, it's the same as the top rail. So it's going to look even all the way around now. And I'm simply going to cut this out with the jigsaw. Okay, I'll use a rasp and some sandpaper, clean this up, and I'll do the same thing to the other three, and then we're ready for some assembly. I have all the pieces here on the bench. I have the arches cut on them, and now I'm ready to glue it up. Now, I'm actually going to glue this up upside down because I figure it's going to be easier to keep all these surfaces flat, and if I have any inconsistencies, well, I can just plane or sand down the feet. All right, now putting this all together, sometimes you feel like you need a third hand for it. So here's a little tip. I'll use these spring clamps to balance this for me. Now I can put this in place. And I can get some clamps on this. All right, now I'm going to put more clamps on it. I'm going to put 2 more up here as well as a couple of going across. But make sure as you're putting your clamps on, you're checking this for square. And make the adjustments you need and slowly tighten the clamps up evenly so it doesn't get out of square for you. So let me do this, and then I'm going to bring the lid in, and I got to put that curve on the ends of the lid. So the box is in the clamps drying up, and I have the lid here. Now the lid has the same type of construction of that tongue and groove joinery. Now when I was laying the pieces out for this, I noticed that I had this mineral streak in it, and I made certain to keep that on the outside edge because my lid is going to have a curve to it. Again, from the plans, I made this template. And I'm just going to simply line the template up at the edge here. Keep it flush, front to back. And I'll trace out my line. And so now, that ugly mineral streak, well, that's going to go away. I'm going to cut that out with the jigsaw, and of course, file and sand that smooth. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to put the bottom in the box. So I put cleats around all 4 sides. That's going to support the bottom. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put a couple of clearance holes in this. And now I can slide the bottom in. And with those clearance holes, well, I can run a few screws in it and keep it in place. All right, after I do that, I'm going to show you how we're going to mount the lid. So I've put the lid on top of the chest, and I wanted to make sure that I have everything centered, equal distance on all 4 edges. Now to get my hinges lined up, I'm first going to draw a line along the back of this, and then I want the hinge to line up where the stile and rail comes together, so I'll put a pencil mark there. I did the same at the other side. Now when I place my hinge on, I want to make sure that the barrel of it is on that outside. So I'm on this side of the line. And I'm trying to have the line go right down that barrel. And I've already made a couple of pre-holes on this, and I'll put the screws in. Now because these screws are so small, I'm using a screwdriver for it because I'm afraid that the drill will have too much torque and strip the head out. Okay, now that I have the hinges on the lid, I need to get the hinges on the chest. So I'm going to lay this down. And I've got a board just to kind of lift the back up a little bit. And I'm going to lift the chest up so it sits on the barrel. Okay, and again, I already pre-drilled for these screws, but you're going to want to measure and make sure you have the equal distance again on both sides of the lid, and then I'm going to put the screws in. All right, the lid's closing, flat and level. Now, I don't want to rely on these hinges for the support to keep it open. I guarantee it, with these small little screws, you flip this open, it's going to pull those out. Now on the original, I used a chain for support to take the load off of that. But if you have little kids, you might want to change it because kids will be hanging over into this and there's a chance it can fall in on them. So they have these lid support hinges that when the lid opens up, it'll lock in place. That way it's a lot safer for the kid. So on the original piece, as far as finish, well, I didn't have to apply any stain. This is the natural color of the cherry and the maple, just with the top coat added to it. But I did decide to put a little painting on the front. See, hope chests traditionally were made for someone, and it would either have the name or maybe the family crest on it. In this case, I decided just to do a picture. However, on this one, if you're thinking about maybe trying to do a two-tone to it, I would suggest that you stain the stiles and rails first before you put the actual panels in. In this case here, I'm just going to stain it all one even color all the way across. And as far as the top coat, I'm just going to use a durable wipe-on finish for this. Well, I hope you enjoy this project, and more importantly, I hope you build this hope chest for someone special in your life. Come back next time and see what we're making right here on I Can Do That. Now, as I mentioned before, I didn't mention before, I didn't say that at all. I'm going to tell you now. Start over. It's hard to smile when you know it's not going to work out.